Welcome to this episode of Men Who Understood the Times. I'm Michael with Andy and Josh. Josh, what are you drinking tonight?
I have my standard Lakefront IPA.
Wow. And Andy?
I've got the Stone Delicious traditional IPA tonight, but it's in a Packer Victory Monday glass.
That's it. Yeah, I went out last night with a pastor from Vegas that was here in town, so I had my beer for the week last night. So tonight I'm finishing off the rest of the Cherry Bounce. So then our disclaimer is we're probably I don't know if you guys have heard this, if we offend anyone when we're talking in previous episodes. We'll probably offend people with this episode too, since we're going to be talking about feminism. And just a reminder, we're not talking for our churches or our church body or our school, but we are going to be talking about the four waves of feminism and then the lies of feminism, and then to see is feminism compatible with Christianity. So, first wave feminism is from 1848 to 1920, uh, and it is where the 19th Amendment began or was voted in on August 16th in 1920, giving equal rights for all women to be able to vote. Uh, so, Andy, do you want to talk a little bit about first wave feminism?
Yeah, just a little bit that these things grew out of mostly prideful reasons. I mean, they're trying to um, there is an underlying agenda always with these worldly agendas, worldly initiatives to upset and turn over traditional norms, right? So whether it happened late in the 1800s, early 1900s, the the goal is to disrupt traditional relationships, marriages, and of course families too, and empower the individual, which, you know, greater access and responsibility when it comes to everyday life sounds really nice until you realize what the ultimate agendas of these things are. They're really antagonistic to Christianity, and they are exacerbating or promoting a turn inward for the individual. So, of course, there are other worldviews and philosophies and agendas that do this too, but feminism in particular teaches women to look inward to themselves for empowerment instead of looking outward to God, number one, above all, and then number two, to God's word for where their true strength comes from.
And then, Josh, you want to respond to anything with that first wave of feminism?
It's spot on. It's just I've heard Christians argue that well, the first wave was okay, except that it really set the table for all of the other ones, and really served as the foundation for undermining God's plan for the family. And so I would disagree.
Okay. And then I'm going to explain what second wave is, and then Josh, you can respond to it. So, second wave is from 1963 to the 1980s. In 1963, Betty Friedan published The Feminine Mystique, which argued that women were chafing against the roles as wives and mothers. And the book was a massive success, selling 1.4 million copies in 3 years, launching the second wave of feminism. This wave called for a re-evaluation of traditional gender roles in society, feminism, or it was also called women's liberation. And then Roe v. Wade was part of this in 1973. It was really brought in uh, sexual freedom and then rampant abortion. So, Josh, going to respond to second wave feminism.
Um, Second wave feminism, there are a couple of things that are part of this. My apologies for the I'm running everything on one computer today, and I don't know how to silence my Facebook Messenger without silencing everything here. So I'm sorry. Um, there's the need to be a part of things, and the protest movements against the Vietnam War, the protest movements that were part of the civil rights movement, there was a lot of purpose built into this. And so you have um, people sort of, that was the beginning of waning away from having a solid church life. And whenever you do that, you've got to replace it with some kind of a purpose. And so this was certainly one of them. You have feminism or women's liberation gaining strength in the as a political force in the 1970s. Um, you've got the National Women's Political Caucus in 1971. And so we can talk a little bit later on about the notion of equal pay. Um, we certainly have that, and yet women make less. I think it's a fascinating conversation we can have a little bit later on. But the this really was the beginning of the destruction of the family, where you have um, an absolute inversion of everything that God created women for is outlined in the book of Genesis. And Satan convinced women through the inversion of second wave feminism that um, her purpose is her prison, and her purpose in children is actually a burden to be killed and aborted. And so, since Roe v. Wade, which is a product certainly of second wave feminism, we have um, genocided, I think is the right word, 60 million babies. 64 actually, I think is what we're at right now. And so that is genocide on the magnitude of entire countries. And we have done that in the name of women's liberation. And liberation from what? It's her purpose that God put there for her as a wife and a mother. And so it truly is an abhorrent set of teachings that I would argue cannot be reconciled with Christianity.
Andy, you want to talk about the second wave of feminism?
Yeah, maybe just on a high level, and I realize this is kind of lofty, but what I want to talk about is some of its lineage. Herbert Marcuse is a uh, for those who know, he's a critical theory sort of patriarch. He came along in the early 1960s and he wrote this dark book called Repressive Tolerance. And consistent with a critical theory like or Marxist like um, hollow and deceptive use of language, as Greg Schultz calls it, you have these, like Josh alluded to, the women's liberation movement. The underlying premise of that is that women need to be liberated from something.
Mhm.
Well, did they? Were they not truly free? That is very, very deceptive and shallow, and it's a lie. But on the other hand, it's an honest truth. The agenda is we want to liberate women from their traditional repressed state. Some terminology dropping for you. Everyone's heard of the term woke, right? Well, in critical theory or Marxist trace Marxism type uh, writing, you'll read a word called reification. And what that has to do with is a person, an individual, in this case, we're talking about women during that second wave of feminism, sort of rediscovering, reawakening to their true selves, their true free selves. And the irony here is that the underlying agenda is that they're so enslaved by these traditional constructs of the powerful and the patriarchal system, right? But what they do essentially is try to simply replace it with a new and much more demonic construct, right? Which is to say, um, you know, freedom is in rebellion, freedom is in agitation, freedom is in undermining uh, the traditions and the norms that you used to know. And just to put like a snarky last point on this, I guess what I would say is, last week we were talking about how can we talk about a given subject. In this particular case, I think it's important for us to assert that as white, cisgendered, heterosexual, native born, able bodied Christian males, we are the we are the perfect candidates for this subject matter. Haha, obviously being snarky here, but the idea is that you know, this has to be framed rather than in this worldly verbiage. It has to be framed in a much more spiritual conversation. We have to use God's word to try to get a proper understanding of ourselves first and then the world around us. And what this second wave feminism in particular began to do or took to an extreme is a complete diversion, of course, from that.
Right. And so it's important for our listeners to understand that we as Americans, we love our freedom. And that's a good thing. God wants us to be free. And yet, like the Apostle Paul says, do not use your freedom to sin. Because we're talking here about the second wave feminism of their freedom of throwing off their norms, throwing off patriarchy, throwing off, what God has set up in the Bible. Well, then it's just chaos. And then, we've been looking with third wave feminism and uh, what you were talking there too about victim status. I had talked to our teens 2 weeks ago in our Bible study on, we were talking about transgenderism and homosexuality and things like that. And I laid out the victim status like we talk about here. And I said, we have the 16s. I said, you two guys, you are at the lowest of the totem pole as far as victim status. You ladies, you're only one step ahead of them, above them because you're white women. And then we went all the way through all the different victim statuses. And that leads into, or that comes from third wave feminism, which is from
Let
the
me just
19th.
riff on that real quick.
Okay.
Um, so if we're going to talk about Marxism, Andy, and what I hear you talking about, Mike, really is intersectionality, which
Yep.
is the notion that you have intersecting layers of oppression. And so the hegemony, which that could have been a title for this podcast, like the hegemony and like, really spidery cursive, it would have been cool. Um, the hegemony is white, cisgendered, heterosexual, able-bodied, native-born Protestant men, us. So you are oppressed to the degree to which you are not in one of the categories that I just said. So women, white women who are also heterosexual and able-bodied, native-born, and whatever else, they would have one layer of oppression. If you are a non-white, so if you're a black woman, you have two layers. If you are a black transgender two-spirit um, woman who is genderqueer and identifies as a penguin or whatever, then you would have all of the layer. And you see this because the more oppressed you are, the stronger your voice is in the spirit of the age. And so the word here is inclusivity. And so DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, that's what this is talking about. And this riffs off of the critical theorist Kimberly Crenshaw on the concept of intersectionality, which again is how types of oppression based on class, gender, etc., can overlap. Third wave feminists also drew on the work of gender theorist Judith Butler, which set the table for trans rights or intersectional feminism, which, as we get into fourth wave feminism, um, it's really interesting. I was just listening to a podcast by Rosaria Butterfield where she asserts that in public, feminism is dead. And it feminism's child, which is transgenderism, has actually killed modern feminism. And the only place it still exists is in the church, which that's a super spicy assertion. Um, but I can see how the argument works. And
Right.
so wherever you want to go from there.
Yep. We'll
Well,
get to that.
so just sorry to interrupt, Mike, but Josh, to that point too, it might be important for people to hear, keying off what you said, that with hegemonic, that's like power structure, right? The control mechanisms of power in a given society or in a given institution. They would say that the oppression that you spoke of, it's not limited to, when we think of oppression, we think of the Israelites in Egypt, don't we? Well, what these people are pushing is the idea that oppression doesn't include like cruelty or overt acts
Right.
of harm or injustice, but it's just the way that dominant or predominant social views or institutions or traditions, constructs assert their power and authority. So you can maybe hear the overtones here of you know how it bleeds into the church. And so the church, not just as one institution, but probably as a primary, like a an like the ultimate wrongdoer, is the one institution that perpetuates these things about family and about the nature of self. And you
Mhm.
have to be set free from whatever the church will tell you. And in particular, churches that are dominated by males, which of course runs into our belief system with regard to our roles of men and women. That's a very big
Which is
threat.
patriarchal, and patriarchy, let it be said, patriarchy is a biblical construct.
Right. Yeah, and we're
It
going to
is
be
not a bad thing.
touching on those when we finish the third and fourth wave. So third wave is 1990s to the early 2000s. It was tackling sexual harassment in the workplace, shortage of women in positions of power. You guys talked about this. The third wave embodied a spirit of rebellion instead of reform, and encouraged women to express their sexuality and individuality with intersectionality, with where feminism drew support for homosexuality, queerness, trans rights, and what you guys were talking about, that power structure. What I talked about with our teens is I use a real life example from like 3 weeks ago in California in a gym where a lady came out of the locker room screaming that there was a man in her locker room, and she was the one that kept saying uh, in the gym, which she got kicked out of and had her membership taken away. And then she went and talked to a congressman that is running for governor, and he chased him
Mhm.
down in two different uh, situations. And then she brought it up saying, this happened. I am a black lesbian. I support you, but there was a guy that was in my locker room. And what I explained to the teens is exactly what you guys were saying is being a black lesbian is pretty high up in the power structure, victimhood, but not higher than the trans person. And
You know his name, Mike?
what's that?
The gentleman who's running for Congress. Did you catch his name?
Yes. Scott Wiener. Yeah.
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 It's worth mentioning, I think.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And but then I think we talked about third waves because that leads right into fourth wave, which is present. Uh, it's difficult to define. Social media fueled activism. Uh, we lived through this in 2017 and beyond, the hashtag Me Too movement, and it grapples with the concept, again, of intersectionality with sexuality, race, class, gender. Andy, I would think this is where Marxism would fit in.
Yeah, we've already touched on it, so I won't obsessively talk about it. But one of the things that I'd want to point out is that one of the difficult things that you have to come to terms with as a Christian is the synergism of the things within these movements and these worldviews that are that have the appearance or the veneer of validity. So, for example, the Me Too movement, was it bad that some misuse, abuse, and harm that was caused in the workplace, particularly by men, say, was exposed? Well, absolutely not. But does that mean that we should throw the tables over, turn over the tables of traditional male female interaction to the degree that we have now? Well, no. So, and what you'll run into this in our church body even, but if you listen for it in society too, the argument from within our church body will often be, well, you know what? There's a kernel of truth to these things. And that particular observation is not necessarily wrong. But just because there is a kernel of truth to them does not mean that abiding or adopting parts of the worldview, because it comes with an agenda, is is beneficial for us. And my argument to counter that for this entire conversation would be simply that we have the tools at our disposal that we need that are the most effective. We don't need the movement, we don't need the methodology, we most certainly don't need to adopt any of the language. We simply need the Word of God and perhaps even a better grasp on it in order to articulate the more worthwhile solutions for understanding not only ourselves but our roles within relationships and our roles within the world.
Yeah, and what you were talking about there is, kernel of truth. Again, I've heard it with other pastors talking about critical theory and responding to different documents. Well, there's this good thing or that good thing. And I learned enough from you guys about critical theory. So I responded, and my pastor circuit meeting said, no, we got to throw this whole thing out because, even Satan used a kernel of truth in Eden or in the desert. And uh, so we ought to be very
Since
careful.
Satanism has a kernel of truth to it, and that
Yeah,
Satan exists, so like we don't want to like, and this is ridiculous. Obviously, you can't sanctify Satanism,
yeah,
No,
and
or maybe a biblical example. Think of the Israelites when they came out of Egypt across the Red Sea. We had it so good in Egypt. You know,
yeah, yeah.
we at least we had food and water there. Well, they weren't wrong. They did have those things, but was that the better situation for them? Of course not. And so, God should have said, you know what, you guys are right. Let's turn back. Of course not.
yeah.
So you just don't adopt the methodology and the type of language and agendas and activism of a movement just because they've made an accurate observation about the world or about the people within it. You simply stick to the scriptures and maintain that worldview and use scriptural language. You use Christian sanctified language and methodology, by the way, in order to continue to minister to people or to interact with one another. Um, but I'm on a soapbox here.
Well, yeah, and with that, so in prepping for this, I did a Google search on the lies of feminism. And, I'm wise enough to understand that when I type something into Google, that doesn't mean it's going to give me the answer that I'm looking for. Because when I typed in the lies of, or and it wasn't the lies of feminism, it was biblical verses against feminism. And Google said there are no Bible verses that are against feminism. Feminism is a good thing. I'm paraphrasing. So I went to a different search engine that I found through Prager University called FreeSpoke, and then I typed in the same thing. And so I found an article, and I'll share this on my Facebook page, Resisting the Dragon's Beast. It's the 10 Lies of Feminism by Probe Ministries from Bible.org. And what I want to do is I'm going to read each of these lies and then let you guys respond to each of these because it's important. I think you guys have done an excellent job of an overview of the lies of feminism. But now let's dig deeper. So lie number one, women can have it all. So the first lie is that women can have it all. We were fed an illusion that women, being the superior sex, have an inexhaustible supply of physical and emotional energy that enable us to juggle a career, family, friendships, and volunteer service. Proponents of feminism declare that not only can women do what men do, but we ought to do what men do. Since men can't do what women can do, have babies, this put a double burden on women. So, Josh, first, if you want to respond to that lie, women can have it all.
Women weren't designed to have it all. Um, and there are, when you said that, I was reminded of Genesis 3:16. Uh, Part of the burden or the curse that Eve had for her role in the fall into sin, the Lord says, "Your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you." Okay. And now you guys are the linguists here far more than I am. I am not a Hebrew or Greek scholar, but my understanding of that curse is the husband has to lead. Eve, your curse, you're going to want to lead. And by the way, the husband's curse also is abdicating that. And so you cannot have a situation where you have a husband whom you are submitting to, in a way that is concurrent with biblical patriarchy, where you have a man who is, if he's being like Jesus, and I'll repeat this again later, he's putting his own needs aside and putting the needs of his wife and children before his own to the point of death because that's his task. You can't submit and also have that role at the same time. So it's not possible to have it all. That's just a lie.
Yeah. And then, Andy, I'll ask you the same question, but first, I'm the father of four daughters, and here I think of my two younger daughters, one that just got engaged and one, Lord willing, that will be engaged soon. And Lydia, my third daughter, she had told me just before they got engaged, saying, "Yeah, I'm thinking of instead of being uh, a commercial airline pilot, that I'll do freight because then I can be at home more." That's saying I can't have it all. I need to be at home. And my youngest daughter, Belle, who's a sophomore at Wisconsin Lutheran College, uh, she had said, "Well, I don't think I want to be this and go for 7 years for a doctor. I'll just be like an assistant and go for 4 years because then I can raise a family." That's saying they understand they can't have it all. And I told them all the same thing, all four daughters. You don't have to go to college. You don't have to do, have a job and so forth, because your career, the best thing you can do is just be a wife and then be a stay-at-home mom. And Lord willing, that's what all of them will do eventually. So if you want to respond to that lie, Andy.
Sure. So, Josh, I think you were thinking more of Genesis 2:18 because certainly Eve's submission was not a consequence of the fall. It was something that the Lord established within her marriage prior to the fall. So it was a wonderful gift of God within the institution of marriage pre-fall. So, for example, when God said, "I will make a helper suitable for," I'll make a helper suitable for Adam. The Hebrew word there is kenegdo, and the idea there is the perfect corresponding companion. And that's where her submission, God sanctified as it is, was established. That said, you know, we have spoken of in this context of Marxism and in this conversation, particularly about feminism, about we've made a reference to constructs, right? Social constructs, and what the antagonists to the Christian worldview will say is that these constructs are flawed and evil and oppressive and repressive. Well, they provide what I don't even mean to exaggerate or sensationalize it, but I think it's a demonic alternative, which we shouldn't be surprised by in this sin stricken world. But the alternative is actually far more burdensome. By the way, so a construct, Christians, we grant the existence of some constructs. Like, for example, the idea of race as we know it today is very different than the idea of the one human race that God created. It's been that term has been reconstructed in a way that's very, very different, but it does exist, right? And then the construct that you were speaking of, Mike, that there has this illusion that there's one path of life right now. You get to about 4 years old, you go to preschool, you go to kindergarten, you go to elementary school and middle school, you go to high school. Then everybody, if you're doing the normal constructed thing, you go to college, maybe grad school, maybe an advanced degree beyond that even, and then you get a job and have a career. That's kind of the construct. And women have been fed this lie that should be the predetermined plan for their life too. That is a replacement construct than what God tells us with regard to Christian vocation, isn't it? Which is there's so much more that you could do. And by the way, by more, I mean less. Like, for example, if you decide that you want to find a really good and reliable and providing husband, and you want to forge a more traditional lifestyle, have kids, raise the family, perhaps even homeschool, something like that, but whatever, then that is an incredible accomplishment in life. But we've been sold this lie that that's somehow more meager and that's a lesser path to take. Well, so, and by the way, the construct that's been set up now that women have to be professionals too actually burdens women and consciences more because now they have to live in a commensurate way as men do. Plus, they have to be the child bearers and the child nurturers. So they actually have more on their shoulders now because that's what the devil does. Like he did with Eve, he speaks this half truth, this lie that the grass is greener on the other side of the fence, that the fruit really is going to be beneficial for you. And then once you taste it, you realize, wow, this is worse by far.
Yeah, and it we're going to talk about this after the lies of how this impacts Christians and impacts within the Christian church. But just what you were saying, Andy, reminded me of what I would do when I was a pastor in Racine is every year I would go to Shoreham Lutheran High School and I would take a day or two and sit down for about 15 to 20 minutes with each of our Water of Life students and just get to know them. They can get to know me, find out about what their plans are for the future. And I remember talking to a couple of the young ladies that were seniors in high school, and one in particular. I said, "Well, what do you think of what are your plans after high school?" And she got all sheepish and embarrassed and said, "I just want to get married and be a mom." And like it was a bad thing. And I said, that is the best thing of all. But that's how we get the ladies get infected. So, line number two, and Andy, you can respond to this one. Men and women are fundamentally the same. Apart from some minor biological differences, feminism strongly suggested that males and females are fundamentally the same. Culture, it announced, was responsible for turning human blank slates into truck-wielding boys and doll-toting girls. And there I think of I've been asked numerous times with four daughters, well, did you miss not having a son? And I said, I love being a girl dad. The only thing I miss is that none of the girls like Star Wars. Other than that, it was fantastic. But I just had this conversation with a number of the girls that are high school students at our church. They happen to be wrestlers. And I asked them about, do you have to wrestle guys? And they said no. And they wouldn't wrestle guys. And if my girls were into wrestling, that wasn't a thing when they were younger, that they I wouldn't let them wrestle guys because and I actually told one of the guys too. He's had to wrestle a girl in the beginning when he was a freshman. I said, you can't win because if you dominate her, which you probably should because you're a guy and you're stronger, well, you're just supposed to do it. And if you lose, well, then all the guys are going to make fun of you because you lost to a girl. And it's not fair to the guy, it's not fair to the girl. So, Andy, why don't you respond to that lie that men and women are the same?
Sure, I'll be very concise here, and that is that I wrote in my paper called Fishers of Men, which really evaluates the lineage of critical theory, where it came from and what its ramifications are. But I wrote something along the lines of that critical theory defies, in many cases, not only the decency and order of God's creation, but common sense. It's obvious to the casual observer that men and women are different, and it's not just because of the defined biblical roles, but because of the biological makeup.
Josh, how about you, just for sake of time, respond to line number three. Desirability is enhanced by achievement, meaning the third lie of feminism is that the more a woman achieves, the more attractive and desirable she becomes to men. The importance of achievement to a man's sense of self, an element of masculinity that is, we believe, God-given, was projected onto women. Feminism declared that achieving something, making a mark in the world, was the only measure of success that merited the respect of others. So respond to the lie that desirability is enhanced by achievement.
No, achievement is masculine. It just is. And men are not attracted to that. Men are attracted to femininity. And my wife is brilliant. She is a physical therapist. She has her doctorate from Marquette. And in the first part of our marriage, because she has a doctorate in physical therapy and I'm a Wells teacher, like, guess what? She actually made more money than I did. Until I branched out, started having side hustles, and now I have an LLC, and so that has rebalanced. It- that's simply patently untrue. Um, I don't know of any man who places value on on a woman because of her net worth. Um, I don't think it's unfair to say that women do that because you see all over the internet influencers, athletes, movie stars, celebrities, whatever. Men who have very, very deep pockets can pull beautiful women because women are attracted to wealth. That's a male construct. That's a masculine thing. Um, and I mean, think about this. I'm not sure what your wives do vocationally. And right now Erica works part-time. When she comes home having worked a full day, that that's excellent that she's contributing and she's using her gifts, and she also views her job as a ministry because she has a captive audience as a therapist, and she has had the chance to witness Christ many times to her patients. But that depletes her, and it does nothing for me. When I see her in her role as a mother, she just glows and she's happy and it fills her up, which in turn fills me up. And it's the most beautiful thing. And so, no, that third one is just patently false.
Andy, line number 4. The myth of one's unrealized potential. Line number 4 says that all of us, but especially women, have tremendous potential that simply must be realized. To feminism's way of thinking, just being average isn't acceptable. You must be great.
Oh boy. Guess what this is? Marxist. This is Herbert Marcuse, his repressed tolerance. This is you have to be fully realized. Um, you know, if you are oh, how could I say it? The tolerance that he said the tolerance we experience every day is repressive, and the tolerance we offer every day is repressive. The point is like your unrealized potential has been repressed, and so you have to be reified. You have to wake up to the potential that exists for you. And just to make brief commentary here, just say that again, this is the demonic attempt to point people inward to themselves and to their own pride. So pride puffs up, love builds up.
Yeah, and in there again, talking about the devil's lies, the devil wants us to be all about achievement in our job, as opposed to uh, Christianity, which should be achievement in our godly vocation of being a husband and father and leader, and or being a wife and mother, and then submitting in the home. The wife giving respect to her husband, the husband giving love to his wife. That is achievement in vocation, not in what the world considers great.
Mike, I know I keep mentioning Herbert Marcuse. If I could just
Mhm.
quote him briefly, and then we can move on to the next point. But here's a direct quote from Herbert Marcuse. He said, "The realization of the objective of tolerance would call for intolerance toward prevailing policies, attitudes, opinions, and the extension of tolerance, so giving tolerance to policies, attitudes, and opinions which are outlawed or suppressed." In other words, today, tolerance appears as what it was in its origins at the beginning of the modern period, a partisan goal. Listen to this, a subversive, liberating notion and practice. So you're trying to set someone free from something that has been repressed and suppressed, but that assumes that there was some kind of enslavement that they need to break free from. And what we're arguing here is that women in general, by God's design, have not been repressed, but blessed.
Josh, line number 5, sexual sameness. The fifth lie of feminism is that men and women are the same sexually. This lie comes to us courtesy of the same evil source that brought us the lies of the sexual revolution. So, sexual sameness.
It's almost as stupid as saying that men and women are interchangeable physically. Um, I mean, uh, for whom is the cost of sex greater, men or women? Um, uh, controlled desire, I think, is widely known to be a heavier burden on the men's side of things. And um, the consequence of sex for men it is extremely short. The consequence for women can be 9 months in utero and then 18 years after that. Um, or if you choose to engage in abortion as de facto birth control, you are then guilty of murder. And so the two aren't remotely equivocal, and to say so is absolutely foolishness.
Right. And uh, the issue I think too of this is when women start thinking like men, then you hear women talking about a body count, how many men they've slept with, which is typically a male thing, which is not a good thing. And now, because of feminism, that sin of the men has been brought into the feminine. Andy, lie number 6, the denial of maternity. Many women postpone marriage and childbearing to pursue their own personal development and career goals. This perspective denies the reality of a woman's reproductive system and the limitations of time. Childbearing is easier in a woman's 20s and 30s than in her 40s. Uh, and there I think of before you respond to this, I think of early on in my ministry when I wasn't very smart, when I would talk to my seventh and eighth graders on the sixth commandment about being married because I had gotten sucked into the whole idea, hey, go to college, so then wait, and then get married, and then wait 2 years to know each other, and then have children and so forth. Well, I didn't really do the math. You're in your late 30, you're in your late 20s, early 30s before you start having kids. Then when I got wiser, I told people, uh, I said the same thing as don't start dating in seventh and eighth grade like they want to. Wait until you're 16, 17, and then, find someone that you want to marry and then date that person and then get married when you're 20, 21, 22 and then start having children right away so you can have lots of children. And but again, I was saying that as a pastor, but you guys know this. When they're young like that, they don't listen so well in seventh and eighth grade or even high school years. This needs to be taught from little on by their parents. So go ahead and respond to that lie about maternity.
Well, perhaps my lived experience, see what I did there, could speak to this somewhat because I dated for a long time, or was in the dating scene for a long time prior to getting married. I met my wife at 29. We married at just before our 31st birthdays. And for what it's worth, my wife has her master's degree in social work from Columbia University, which is an Ivy League school. However, that that badge of honor is much less honorable today than it might once have been because of the trajectory, the downward trajectory of our university system. Nevertheless, she set that all aside because she wanted to be a mother, and she was tremendously gifted and successful at what she did when I met her, and was thriving. And but she told me all her life all she wanted to do was have kids. And the reason I wanted to bring that up is because one of our it's not a regret because the Lord has blessed us beyond what I deserve, what we deserve when it comes to family. But in my heart of hearts, I sincerely wish that we would have met sooner, just so that we could have started our families younger. I'm a type 1 diabetic, for those who might know that. And sometimes I, I unnecessarily worry about my ability to spend time with my kids once they're young adults or into adulthood, just because I worry about the health ramifications. I need not worry, so I'm not saying that's a good thing, but it does make me think, had I dated with more self-control and more purposeful intent earlier on, had the Lord allowed my wife and I to meet earlier on, perhaps we could have started a family earlier on. But again, those things are in the Lord's hands on the one hand, but on the other hand, too, I say this not just to young men now, but to young women too. In your Christian church, in your local Wells church, perhaps you'll hear pithy statements, maybe in some case careless statements about from older people about well, it's a young man's game, or boy, have kids while you're young, that kind of thing. And it sounds so frivolous and like a throwaway phrase, ha ha, and move on. But listen to these statements, listen to the wisdom of your elders, both men and women, because they know. And it doesn't always come from a place of like a hard lesson learned. It comes from a place deep in the heart for those who have yearned for having done it a different way or a better way. And again, that's not to criticize the way my family has done it or the way the Lord has blessed us. It's been absolutely tremendous, beyond what we deserve. But I crave, because my wife is not me, I really sincerely wish I had met her when I was younger, and that she and I together with our kids could grow old together, and maybe the Lord will still allow that to some degree.
Yeah, and to that
Can I
point,
piggyback on that real quick?
well, to that point, I think of two, encourage everyone to get married young, have and then have children, and because I remember my girls were really little playing with dolls, and then they said, "Well, hey, Daddy, we're pregnant," and they had the baby underneath their shirt, and we're pregnant, we're going to get married, and I said, "No, that's not the way we play here. You get married, then you have babies." Uh, and for my oldest daughter, she got married when she was 20. But for whatever reason, with health problems, whether it's her or husband or whatever, it took them 8 years to be blessed with a child, our first grandchild. And as ladies get older, it becomes more difficult to get pregnant and then to keep the pregnancy. And so that would be another reason to start young. And for the dads that are listening to this, is I pride myself at being 55. I'm trying to stay in shape to be able to beat my sons-in-law and future sons-in-law and anything we're gonna do like a race or something like that. Uh, and yet, I also, as a dad, if I were having kids, I'd want to be able to be young enough to be able to do everything, have the energy, and to be able to get out there and play and so forth. And then now, Lord willing, to do that with grandchildren. But if you wait until you're in your 30s, it's going to be really hard to be playing catch with your 10-year-old when you're, 55, 60 years old. Josh.
Uh, You're here and amen. If you are a young man who finds this podcast at some point, um, I'm I'm like the happiest married guy that you'll ever meet. I still can't believe I landed my wife. That's, God's providence. But I've had many high school students, and I have about 140 teenagers per year that I have the honor of teaching. And we have a we have a class on Christian marriage. It's called Friendship to Marriage at Wisco, and part of that class is you find a teacher who you think has a good marriage, and you interview them. And so, um, in the course of these interviews, I was um, sparked to think about what the regrets that I had. So, what are the regrets you have? And I do have three, and they are as follows. I got married at 26. I had been dating Erica for a long, long time, and we could have gotten married earlier. So I regret not getting married to this woman sooner. Um, we heard the same line that you heard, Mike. Oh, you got to get to know each other and travel and do the things and be a cosmopolitan couple, double income, no kids. And so we waited for a bit. We didn't have kids until um my almost my 30th birthday, and now we have three kids. And so get married sooner than later, have more kids, um, and have them sooner. And so we have three children. Um, I, four would be good. Five. I mean, like I have friends with six, seven, eight, nine kids, and there's no regret.
Mhm.
There's just blessing upon blessing
Yep.
upon blessing.
Yeah.
And so get after it.
Yep. So, Josh, respond to this one. Line number 8. No, line number 7, I skipped. To be feminine is to be weak. In the attempt to blur gender distinctions, feminists declared war on the concept of gender-related characteristics. The qualities that marked feminine women, softness, sweetness, kindness, the ability to relate well, were judged as silly, stupid, and weak. Only what characterized men, characteristics like firmness, aggressiveness, competitiveness, were deemed valuable. So first, what made me think of this is I just talked about this the other day in Bible study. We were talking about uh, the roles of men and women, and I asked everyone there, big, good mixed group, said, could women usher in our church? And the guy said, yeah. Why? Because it's a service thing. And then I asked the women, then why don't we have you women serve as ushers if the men could? And it took them a little while, and they got to the point, which I was trying to get them to, is if the women did it, the men would not do it. Then the women would take over, and then the men naturally, like Adam in the garden, will back off. And then what does that do? It just adds more work, more burdens to the women. It's just a natural thing that a woman wants to take over what the man does, and then the man will oftentimes be the spiritual wimp, and he'll back away. And so we need to respect, hey, this is even though women could do it, let's train up our young men to be ushers so that they're training then to serve the women as leaders. Then, Lord willing, they'll want to become church councilmen and elders and so forth. So go ahead and respond to that lie about the femininity.
This is
Well,
another.
no.
Oh, is it me or you?
Yeah, go ahead, Josh.
Okay. Um, this is another attempt to blur the assignments God gave to the sexes. Um, Things like softness, sweetness, kindness, patience. Um, the fact that those are supposedly silly or stupid or weak is a satanic lie from the pit of hell. And I think about the things that um, I am good at as a parent and she is good at as a parent. We both bring things to the table that are very necessary, but completely different. She has softness that, and, and incidentally, patience I do not possess. Um, you hear a lot as a teacher of advanced science, and I teach um, advanced chemistry, quantum physics. So I teach very difficult topics to surly and or bored 17 and 18-year-old kids. That is absolutely my wheelhouse. And I've had more than one early childhood teacher say, like, I could never do your job. And it's like, sister, I could never do yours. Like a room full of 4-year-olds, I would actually die. Like that's not a thing I can do. Um, when women try to take on male qualities, it is as off-putting as when men try to take on female qualities. It's not how it is supposed to be. You are going against your design and you're not accomplishing anything. Um, I cannot be a mother. That's not a thing that I can do. And I watch my wife in her capacity as a mother, and she's so naturally brilliant. It's just effortless. Um, and she can't be a father. That's not when strong, patient, kind toughness that the kids can tell like there's teeth behind that. That's not a thing that a woman should do. When women try that, there's a very terrible word for that that I'm not going to say in this forum, but the word exists and that's terrible. It is an inversion and it's a lie.
Yeah. And there I think of uh, that this morning after I got back from my bike ride, my wife Shelley was on a video chat with our daughter Miriam, who is overseas in the military. And while Shelley was talking to Miriam, our third daughter Lydia called, and she talked to me because Shelley was on the phone with Miriam. And then before we got off, I told Lydia, I said, I'm sorry you got stuck talking to me when you wanted to talk to mom. And I told the same thing to Shelly, and she said, oh, they love talking to their dad too. And that's true. They do. Uh, they don't love their mom more than their dad or more their dad more than their mom, but they want to talk to mom about certain things, and they want to talk to dad about certain things too. And we're going to skip lies 8 and 9, or not, yeah, 8 and 9 for sake of time. But lie 10, Andy, builds on what Josh was just talking about of the roles of men and women. Lie 10, women would enjoy the feminization of men. The 10th lie of feminism is that women would enjoy the feminization of men. Feminists believe that the only way to achieve equality of the sexes was to do away with role distinctions. And then, as men try to be good guys and accommodate feminist demands, the culture saw a new type of man emerge: sensitive, nurturing, warm, compassionate, yielding. Uh, so, what do you think? Are women more attracted to soft men?
Well, I'm I'll have been married 15 years this spring, and I'm not sure I could, even at this stage, pretend to be in the mind of a woman, much less my wife. But I guess I would say with straight face, if that were to happen, who would open the pickle jars? Also, just to riff on what Josh was saying, I actually would concede a little bit that there is weakness in femininity, but not the kind the world casts aspersions upon, but rather the the weakness that is meekness and godly submission and mildness and uh, companionship, and the list could go on, biblically speaking. But when I think of Jesus turning his cheek for more abuse or keeping his mouth shut, for example, I'm not suggesting women need to do these things. I'm just saying, like, when I think of Jesus humbly submitting himself even to imperfect human authorities, I think of a weakness more beautiful and more powerful than anything this world could ever concoct or define. And so I'll admit this is anecdotal, but I will tell you that the most powerful and strong women I have ever met are those who are the God defined and God outlined corresponding companions to their husbands. I've seen such a strength and resilience in these women who are not trying to antagonize or be activists or blur the lines between the genders. That is, it is almost inexplicably and undefinably strong, and it's almost like you'll know it when you see it. But thankfully, as Christians, we can know it by the scriptures. And again, this is not the perfectly applicable passage, but I think it is at least pertinent. And that is, my power, God says, is made perfect in weakness. And to the degree that there is a measure, an ounce of weakness within femininity, as God prescribes it, it is incredibly strong.
Right. And when I teach on this roles of men and women, whether it's in catechism class or adult instruction class or pre-marriage counseling, and we look up like the word helper, that God made a helper for Adam. And then I ask both the man and the women there, is helper a an inferior role? Because our culture would say it is. And then we look up Bible verses where the majority of the verses that use the word helper are referring to God the Father. He is the helper. And that, a wife being submissive to her husband, that is not an inferior role. It's just a different role, giving him what he needs. And I often teach it then that the woman is the God the Father role, the one that is building up and supporting her husband. And then we look at scriptural passages where the man, as the leader, he is the sacrifice, the sacrificial leader of Jesus Christ, that he is the one who is willing to lay down his life for his bride. And so in both roles, neither one is inferior. They serve one another as that mystery of the Trinity serves each other as well. Anything else you guys want to talk about here? Because I have way more notes on here and we're already at an hour. So I'm thinking that we'll probably do another episode with feminism, but I want to talk in that one on the effects of feminism in culture and nation. We've kind of laid the groundwork, but then really dig into the effects of feminism within the Christian church and family. And then with that, my big thing right now is talking about masculinity and then talk about how do we preach masculinity and so forth. And I've said this before, I'm reading books on the Crusades, and I'm on one by Richard Ibrahim on the uh, eight great heroes of the Crusades, and one that I read last night of Richard the Lionhearted. This was a man's man, not only because he was like 6'4" and huge, but he's leading this crusade, and so many of these crusaders they just got ill because the food was awful, the water was dirty, they're not getting any sleep and so forth. And Richard, while they're doing this crusade, he becomes deathly ill on his bed with a fever, and his men are losing. So he has his people prop his bed up on the siege engagement, uh, up against the wall. They give him his bow and arrows, and he's shooting at the enemy while he's deathly ill. Kind of like if you're old enough to remember Michael Jordan with his fever game where he scores, I don't know, was it 50 some points, and he's hugging Scottie Pippen and so forth because he has no energy. Okay. And so I want to talk about the feminism that has affected us as Christian men and the Christian church, and then what do we do as Christian men and as pastors and teachers to build up to counteract that femininity that's infected our culture and maybe the church, and then to preach masculinity. So anything else you guys want to say to wrap this up, Josh?
Um, in response to Andy in line number 10, which again was women would enjoy the feminization of men. Um, I'm not saying that men should be without compassion and being perceptive to the needs of his wife, but a feminized man is a coward and a weakling. And I had this conversation on an airplane with somebody once I was stuck to for 8 hours, or stuck next to for 8 hours. And um, we were talking about this, and the example that broke through for her was, okay, scenario, it's 2 o'clock in the morning, you hear someone breaking into the house. Do you want a man who is going to go and deal with that or hide behind you? Like, which would you prefer? It's like, well, okay, so your point there. It's like, well, yeah, yeah, because we are designed for that, and you are not. And there's nothing wrong with saying that. And the other thing I wanted to say briefly was line number 9, and we should probably post the articles referencing here in the
Yep.
comments. Um, the myth of self-sufficiency, the lie of the spirit of the age so greatly increases the chance of divorce, and here's how. Self-sufficiency is that a woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle was the I forget which feminist said that now. Um,
It was
I think it
actually Bone.
was
It was Bono of U2.
was it what? Are you serious? You're making that up.
What? No, I know he put it in a song. I guarantee you, it's in one of his
He didn't
songs.
say no. I think it was Simone de Beauvoir, but either way, I'm sure that
He probably he probably co-opted it for a lyric, I
he's one of
guess.
those guys. Let's be honest. Um, but there's this notion that the current lie that the kids hear is okay. Um, as the guy and as the girl, you both need to go to college. You both need to build your own little tower of individuality so that you require nothing You don't need anybody, and therefore you are protected by your own sense of indomitable self-sufficiency. And then when you've reached the pinnacle of wealth and you own a house and you own a couple of cars, you can go on a vacation by yourself to Aruba or wherever, and you've traveled Europe by train and done all the romantic things. Then you could, the next adventure then when you're like maybe 35 years old is to find fulfillment in finding another person who has a tower the size of yours and you form a corporation. At which point, neither one of you will need the other at all. And so, and by the way, along the way, you slept with like dozens and dozens of people. And so this is what the world says. And it is such an abhorrent lie versus you get married young and you build an existence with another person whom both intrinsically and with tremendous depth need the other person. Erica needs me and I need her. I'm not normal without her. We are one like alloy to go to chemistry. Inextricable things that are linked together to build something stronger than the sum of its parts. That's what God intended. And that is, I think, important to say if you are a young person who is hearing this podcast.
And someone that I think all three of us keep sharing is clips of this guy of Nick Freitas. Uh, he said something similar, Josh, where he talked about the lie of the guy he builds up his own uh, everything in his life, and then she builds her life, and then they bring it together. He said that doesn't work, and he
No.
talked about his own marriage. I think they got married very young, 20s, I think,
Mhm.
and then he goes, then we build something together. That's the key for all of you young people. Go and find someone and get married right away. Build something together because it's a lot harder to merge two separate homes, two separate careers, uh, two separate dogs, and all that kind of stuff. Just build it together, and the way I think God intended. If that's the way it happens, like it did for Andy, uh, and that's the way it is. But if it's possible, and I think it becomes possible when you're looking for that early on. But I think we're going to build on this more next time. I also want to encourage everyone. Uh, in studying for this, I found a couple of Bible verses. No matter what Google says, I think there are Bible verses that speak against feminism. I'd encourage you to read these longer sections, Isaiah chapter 3, verses 16 through 26, and then Amos chapter 4, verses 1 to 3. Those verses are very strong from God's prophets on his judgments on the nation of Israel. And these judgments are brought on by the women of Israel with their selfish lifestyles. And then I wanted to finish with the strength of a strong wife from Proverbs 31. Uh, who can find a wife with strong character? Her value is greater than that of gems. Her husband's heart trusts her, and he never lacks wealth. So does good for him and not evil. She does good for him and not evil. All the days of her life, she obtains wool and flax. She eagerly works it with her hands. She is like merchant ships. She brings her food from far away. She rises while it's still night. She gives food to her household. She gives their share to her female servants. She considers a field and acquires it. From her own income, she plants a vineyard. She wraps strength around her waist like a belt, and she makes her arms strong. She realizes that she makes a good profit. Her lamp does not go out at night. She stretches out her hands for the distaff, and the palms of her hands grasp the spindle. She opens the palm of her hand to the oppressed, and she stretches out her hands to the needy. She does not fear for her household on account of snow, because her entire household is clothed in scarlet clothing. She makes bedspreads for herself. Fine linen and purple cloth are her clothing. Her husband is known at the city gates, where he sits with the elders of the land. She makes linen garments and sells them, and she delivers belts to the merchants. Strength and honor are her clothing, and she laughs at the days to come. She opens her mouth with wisdom and finds instruction is on her tongue. She keeps a close eye on the conduct of her household, and she does not eat bread that she did not work for. Her children rise up and bless her. Her husband rises up and praises her. Many daughters show strong character, but you have surpassed all of them. Charm is deceptive and beauty is vapor that vanishes, but a woman who fears the Lord should be praised. Give her credit for the fruit of her hands, and let her accomplishments praise her in the city gates. Lord's blessings until next time.